Hi everyone, this is Elias Martin from CollectingJapanesePrints.com, welcoming you to Woodblock Wednesday, where every Wednesday we get together and discuss Japanese prints, paintings, history, and culture. Today, I was sort of inspired by the month of May. We find ourselves in the middle of spring. Well, some of us who are fortunate enough to live near nature can sort of go out and enjoy it. But for the rest of us who live in the city, it's a little bit harder to do. And so I was inspired by sort of May and flowers, and also sort of, this is a way to sort of share with all of you something that possibly not all of you could be experiencing right now, assuming that a lot of you are in cities and self-quarantining. This is an opportunity, again, to look at our artwork that we have been able to be very fortunate to accumulate, and then also just study things and learn about prints and artists. So without further ado, I'd like to share the group of florals with you in a moment. Thanks. All right, so what I've done here is I set up a process set by Taisui. Taisui, or Inazuka Taisui, was a 20th century woodblock print artist. He worked primarily in the late 20s, early 30s. He worked with the publisher Kawaguchi and Sakai. And for those who do not know Kawaguchi Sakai, they were a publishing house that produced prints of, Taisui was one of them, but they're also very well known to produce Hasui. And there's some really fantastic Hasui designs that they've produced. They were in partnership with each other for a few years, and then they had a falling out. And later on, I think it was just Kawaguchi that was printing some of the designs. But in this case, these prints were all produced during the Kawaguchi Sakai partnership, and this design was produced in 1929. And so I'm going to start with the actual watercolor. This is an original work by Taisui, and again, this is Inazuka Taisui, not Hasui. The spelling is very similar, as was the pronunciation, but this is his last name is spelled Taisui. So Inazuka, Inuzuka, and Inozuka, Taisui. So for this particular work, it's a watercolor, and by and large, the way that 20th century Shinhanga prints were made, and you could say this for ukiyo-e prints. The artist was hired by the publisher to create a design, and typically the artist produced a watercolor or a really well-finished articulated sketch with pigment. And in this case, it's a beautiful finished watercolor, and I'll zoom in so you can see the details, but the work is basically graphite pencil with watercolor, and it's done really well. It's fantastic. You could see the watercolor throughout the design. It's very soft. It has kind of a really wonderful sense of like texture to this. These are peonies in a vase, and this was done in 1929. And the watercolor really lends itself quite well to sort of expressing this really soft, supple quality of the flowers. So it's beautiful. And I want to show you the verso. This is very thick watercolor paper as opposed to a sketch pad paper that you sometimes find. Hasui, for example, his preliminary paintings were done on very thin paper. It almost looked like this kind of paper. This is a Hanshita. We'll get to this in a moment, but a very thin paper. And it's interesting because a lot of collectors see Hasui watercolors in the marketplace on thicker paper with a squarish seal. And those watercolors actually were done later. They were done after the design was executed and published and commissioned by a particular collector. And so those are later. The earlier ones have his Taisui seal, the round teardrop seal. It's like a water drop, and not really teardrop, but it's similar. But the point is that those are the earliest ones. And in this case, this is an early preliminary work for the production of the woodblock print. And so once the artist decides on a design, he submits the work to the publisher, and the publisher sort of thinks about the colors, whether it works for his purposes. And once that's done, they carve out a key block. And this is an example of the key block. This is the outline of the design. This is essentially the most important block, because once they carve this key block, they make these hanshita, or the key block impressions, and they use these so that they put them on top of the wood block, and they carve out, and they basically attach this key block to the block, and they use this as a guide to carve the other subsequent color blocks. So in this design, there's the white, here you see here, right here, and this is all white. In one particular color block, they would use this portion to carve out that white block for this portion of the flower and this portion. I hope that makes sense. If you can imagine, in the process of making a print, you need one block for every color. And then you can also reapply colors to those blocks to create different effects. But at the very least, each color requires one block. So you can imagine one block of wood where all of this is not present. Only the white flowers are present, or the white portions that are printed onto this design. And then you add additional color blocks and you build up the design. So this is a really rare work in the sense that it shows the process of making the prints. And usually these key blocks were destroyed because they were used to create the other blocks. And so you see them every so often. A few survive in some cases, and usually the publisher may sort of take one and keep it with the original watercolor to sort of show the process to his clients. And this grouping here comes from the estate of Kawaguchi Sakai, or Kawaguchi, I believe. And so this is why we have a complete set. So moving from the original watercolor to the key block, here is a trial print. It's actually a very rare trial print. You normally don't see this version when you see this design. And this design is actually not all that common to begin with. But what you see here is the background is quite dark. So it's pretty much black. Kind of what the original watercolor looks like. The colors are a bit more intense. The greens are much more, they jump. They're brighter, more intense, more vivid. Whereas here they're a little bit softer. And what I'll do is I'll move the two works right alongside each other so you could see. But basically, you could see the difference between the trial print and the watercolor. The color choices are much more vibrant, much more charged, and they jump out. They're much more vivid. The other thing that's really nice is the woodblock printmaking process, or printing, creates this really wonderful texture. This is something that is unique to woodblock printmaking. This texture, this soft texture that's printed with color over on top of each other, creates this soft sort of effect. I'll zoom in so you can see. That's really hard to achieve in any other form of printmaking, or even watercolor. So you could see here with the original, this is the best you can do to create that texture in watercolor, and this is an example of what could be done with a woodblock printmaking process. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. And so I'm going to zoom out and then move to the original again. I'll stop talking for a moment so you could just enjoy the two works side by side. Now, what's interesting here, also I'll point this out for all of you connoisseurs, you could see that the title was being added here in pencil, and they were trying to figure out what would be in here. And so over here we see the actual writing that was carved into the block and printed. So they were already kind of figuring out how that would be applied. And here we, of course, have the artist's signature and seal, whereas on the original watercolor, that is not present. And typically, on these works by Taisui, you don't see his signature in the original watercolor. Now, what's interesting is the publisher decided to make some changes on how the print was actually at the end of the day produced. So this is the commercial version that the publisher decided on. This was done in a limited edition, and basically, I'm going to move this work over to the original, and you can see it's very different. The background is not black. There's this wonderful sort of grainy effect that can be achieved through printing with wood blocks, that it warms up the design, in my opinion, and it gives it texture. It also sort of helps animate the peonies to move forward to the viewer, where the black here is striking, but I think the gray works better. It works in concert with the other areas that are printed so well with a woodblock, so it actually creates a much more harmonious effect. So, I'm going to zoom in so you could see all three works. On this work again, that texture, the printing effects you get from wood blocks is much more pronounced. And I mean, as a woodblock print collector connoisseur, these are the things that I like to see on a print. The work that goes into building up the design with various colors printed on top of each other, the subtle bokashi, which is a color gradation from dark to light, all of that's been implemented in this design. It is a true labor of love to produce a work like this. And in many ways, it takes much longer if it's done with such care than, than a quick sketch done in pencil and watercolor. The carving, the printing is just so exquisite in this design, and it's wonderful to see these early versions of Shinhanga prints. We, as collectors and even as a dealer, I come across the later printings of a lot of Shinhanga prints, and they don't have these extra embellishments. They're not printed with as much care. And these prints are a fine example of printmaking in its heyday in the early part of the 20th century. So again, seeing the texture on this one. Now this one's not as pronounced as the finished commercial version. And you could also see the way that the blue is handled here. There's a greater sort of difference in this blue with that blue, where this blue is much darker, and it blends into an even darker blue. The contrast here is very striking, and that contrast is made present throughout the design. It's as if the publisher said, let's exploit this effect. Let's bring that out more. The other sort of thing I just noticed is the brown around the stem and the leaves is much more pronounced than the brown here, and that works in concert with the background. So again, this is a really great finished commercial version. Then again, we come here to the experimental trial impression. And I'm going to bring in back the key block. Very rare to see the original key block. And I see now a lot of people have started joining us. And I would encourage all of you to go back and watch the video at the beginning where we discuss the woodblock printmaking process. But this is, again, the key block that allows for the carving of the subsequent blocks to produce this very complicated design. And then this is the original watercolor, again, by Taisui, not to be confused with Hasui. And again, this was a design published by Kawaguchi and Sakai in 1929. So I am going to pan across all the works one last time. It's unfortunate that you can't be here in person to see these because they're very subtle and they reveal a lot of their own secrets when you look at them up close. But I'm going to try my best to sort of just capture the way they look. I'm going to sort of pan out so you could see all the works on my table there. They look quite nice, all put out on the table. So again, just to sort of recap, what we looked at is an extraordinarily rare sort of, I'm using this in air quotes, process set, but it basically shows the process in making woodblock prints in the centuries-old tradition of Edo period and also Edo period ukiyo-e and 20th century Shinhanga, where an artist submitted a watercolor design to the publisher. The publisher then decides on, some changes, and in this case, the changes were really minor, but we see changes and to the original color choices that exploit the woodblock print techniques and really showcase those techniques. And of course, the publisher would be very keenly aware of what to do to bring out the design to make it a much more successful woodblock print. And in this case, the watercolor is quite exquisite. It's beautiful. But the choices that the publisher made in the production of the print, I think, were the right choices. And he went from the watercolor to a woodblock print that was very similar, almost very true to the original. And then there was a compromise made. And the publisher really thought about how to best amplify this design, utilizing printing techniques that are exclusive to woodblock printmaking. And so this is the finished design. And so, I think this process set or this grouping is a wonderful opportunity to see the the woodblock printmaking process at work. I should say that this is not a true process set in the sense that you don't see the printing of each step to create the print. And I have actually shown that in a previous episode of Woodblock Wednesday. So I encourage all of you to go to my website, collectingjapaneseprints.com, click on Woodblock Wednesday, and then it's one of the first videos I produced. And I have a process set, an album, where you see a woodblock print being made step by step by step. It's quite a thing to see. But in this case, I wanted to really showcase more the emphasis of the artist working in collaboration with the publisher, and how the artist first conceives of a design, and then working with the publisher. And I'm assuming then the publisher made these changes as they printed. The artists of the Shinhanga period didn't have as much. They did not have as much of a hands-on connection to the production of the prints themselves. That was really more the publisher. And in this case, it was Kawaguchi and Sakai. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining me once again on Woodblock Wednesday. And what I'm going to do, because it is the month of May, and all of us are, most of us live in cities and aren't connected to nature as much as we'd like, and we're staying in a bit more, hoping that all of this will pass sometime soon. Nonetheless, I think I'll continue the theme of May and flowers, and next week I will discuss some Sosakuhanga florals produced in a very different way, and with very different results, but no less beautiful. So that's something for all of you to look forward to next week. So thank you again for joining me. I look forward to seeing you next week on another episode of Woodblock Wednesday. Thank you.